that we've got the broadest possible representation in the most logical, efficient order to be able to do the work in the best possible way. And that may require some changes, it may require some expansion, it may require some shrinkage. God only knows. But one thing we do know is that the people who are here today are the right people to begin to have these conversations. And so Todd Hamilton, who's the co-chair of that steering team, sits on the state team that oversees the LAPRI. I'll be describing that in some detail. So I'm going to spend an hour and a half or so, I guess, talking with you about LAPRI. I've got a PowerPoint I'm going to do. I'm going to turn it over to Roger Shabilsky. And remember, Shabilsky is the way to pronounce his name, because when you read the way it's spelled, it's one of those incomprehensible names that we just love to make fun of all the time. Roger is, and he won't say this, I will, he is the preeminent expert on the science of implementation. And he knows why these efforts fail to be able to put into place in such a way regionally and statewide, they work the way they're supposed to. They're developed with fidelity in mind, but they're implemented and all hell breaks loose and stuff just doesn't work the way that it's supposed to. A researcher friend of ours, Ed Ryan from Ohio, published a document, a research document, and there's a quotable quote in there, and it is, implementation is the bane of reentry. I'm not sure what bane is. I think it's one of the things you throw at a werewolf. They're coming at you, but it doesn't sound good to me. And in that nugget is really the truth of it. As hard as it is to develop the framework and develop the policies and create the organizational structures, as hard as that is, it pales in comparison to the difficulty of actually implementing the stuff with fidelity, an important word. So, as part of a community, a statewide community of LAPRI parishes that have committed to the model and the framework, you're part of a much larger effort than what will be occurring here, and know that there are some parishes that have been working well ahead of you in a much organized fashion. St. Tammany, for example, which is the most incarcerative parish in the state, which is the most incarcerative state in the Union, which is the most incarcerative country in the world. So St. Tammany is the most incarcerated place on the planet Earth. When I'm in Covington, I remember that. I just walk very straight and narrow. But that's important to know because Covington is really pulled themselves together well, have a good steering team, have done the work, they're very well organized, and that's the place where we're going to be testing out the model. I'll come back to that. But as my larger point here, that as part of a larger statewide effort, and particularly looking to the Louisiana Prisoner Reentry Steering Team Association, that's an ungodly name. The acronym's pretty good. It's Laprista. If it's Lapri, which has got a little French sound to it, then Laprista is the association. And we'll be able to learn from each other. What works well in some communities may not work as well in others. And we can learn from each other. And that's how we'll be moving forward. Make sense? So to begin with, I've mentioned the vision. And I've touched on these particular points here. We have a model which is very broadly and very deeply endorsed by not just the Department of Corrections, but the governor himself has endorsed it. We have a about an 8 or 10 minute taped video of the governor that we can send around to folks that shows his dedication to this. And it's great to hear Governor Edwards say these things. He understands this stuff very, very well. Not surprisingly, we're also endorsed by other public policy groups, Louisiana Smart on Crime, and Louisiana Right on Crime, Louisianans for Prison Alternatives, which could be called Louisiana Left on Crime. And if there was a group called Louisiana Center on Crime, we'd be right in the middle of that too. There aren't a whole lot of downsides to what we're talking about here. Improved individualized case plans is not controversial. We were endorsed by the Justice Reinvestment Task Force, unanimous, to be the comprehensive evidence-based framework through which prisoner reentry reforms will take place in the state of Louisiana. And so it's very widely, broadly, deeply, uniformly accepted as the way we'll do business. Eventually, there will be nothing called Lapri. The I will drop out. It won't be an initiative, it'll be the way we do business. How long will that take? It's up to the state. But following those 5 parishes that represent 40% of everybody in prison, there's another 7 behind them that represent the next 30%. So in the state of Louisiana, when you're working with 12 parishes, you've got upwards of 65% of everybody who's in prison. And if you can have an impact on those 12, you will start to see the statewide recidivism rate goes down. The expectation is we will become statewide. We will move from parish to regions, and regions will cover the state. And that's in the next 3 or 4 years. This workshop has many multiple parts. We're not going to do all of this today. We're going to focus on kind of fundamentals, a little bit on evidence-based practice. We're going to look at the framework, and we're going to look at organizational structures. And we'll get that far. With this information in hand, you all can decide whether you want to go deeper at another time. Does that look like a reasonable agenda then? Yes. So let's start with some fundamentals. This is going to be important for not only the work that happens, but it's a little bit of a setup for Roger to do his presentation a little bit later this morning. So as I mentioned, evidence-based principles are those approaches that research has shown have a demonstrable, statistically relevant impact on reducing individual criminality, and by virtue of that, the potential to reduce recidivism for an entire population of people, whether that's in a community or statewide. And this document here, which y'all, if any, you want versions of this PowerPoint, we'll make these available to you. You can take notes if you'd like. The fine print down here is one of the best documents that's ever been published about evidence-based practices. I keep it on the side of my desk. 2009, sounds like a little bit old, but it's still extraordinarily relevant. And they produced this great looking helix here, looks like DNA to me, that puts all the evidence-based practices in one diagram and kind of gives you an idea of what they are. You get that picture. But what I like to do when I do the training is I like to divide them up into evidence-based practices that affect organizations and evidence-based practices that affect clients, because there's some distinction between them. And they're somewhat interactive, of course. But one of the main few here have to do with what we all consider the main part of the work, which is improved reentry plans. But we have to target the right people with our scarce resources. The right people that we want to target are the people who generally don't show up at our place, knocking in our door and asking for help. They're not the ones that come dressed right. They're not the ones that are respectful. They're the ones that are non-compliant with bad attitudes, and you got to track them down and they're not compliant. And they fail again and again and again. And we have to find those individuals that have a moderate to high risk of recidivating, a moderate to high risk of committing new crimes. We have to find them before they get out of prison and target them and meet with them and work with them so that we give them the best chance possible to be successful before they hit the street. And with their peer associations and their criminal thinking and their records, which keep them out of jobs and housing, and their attitudes and behaviors that keep them out of behavioral health programs, we give them the best possible chance of hitting the ground on strong legs. In order to do this, we have to assess their risk, we have to assess their needs, and we do that through the use